And it is time, one more time, to get solar powered. We welcome you back to the Solar Powered Podcast, where we celebrate the world changing magic of ordinary people telling extraordinary stories. My name is Ryan Hall, and I think I've got a fascinating conversation with it for you here today. Have you ever been had a time in your life where you've just been going through hell, where you've just been going through everything and all of the trauma, all of the pain, all of the all of the mess from your past has started to come back to haunt you, and you kind of feel like you're Forrest Gump and you just needed to start running, but you need to get lost to find yourself again. And I think I have a really a beautiful example of this here today. Her name is Jackie Baldwin. She is a previous guest on the podcast, but she is the author of, I think, a really powerful new book called The Bend in the River, where she tells her personal story that includes, well, kayaking the Connecticut River and how she found herself by doing so. And she joins us here today. Jackie Baldwin, welcome back to the Solar Powered Podcast. Thank you for getting solar powered with us today, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. And I always enjoy being on your podcast.
Well,
Really grateful to be here.
well, the pleasure is all mine. Well, um, I I seem to remember one of our previous conversations that you kind of dropped the hint about this book, The Bend in the River, being in the pipeline. Can you tell us a little bit about just kind of the germ of the idea and how it got started?
Yes, absolutely. So back in 2020, I believe it was April of 2020, back, if we can remember back that far, it was COVID had hit. The world had shut down in March. And part of the networking group that I was in, and I believe you were in as well, or however you had gotten involved, you and I both answered the call to write a chapter for a book called The Great Pause. Um, and so that was where it kind of came from. I actually went to college to be a writer for television. That's what I wanted to do. Now I'm a financial advisor, so go figure. But um, in any event, when this all came about, I was like, oh, this is my time to start writing again. And so I wrote that chapter. And then shortly after that, there was another opportunity, another call put out to write a chapter of a more personal nature for a book for Ladies Power Lunch called Transformation 2020. And we were supposed to write a chapter. They were looking for chapters of how our lives had transformed. Well, that one was a very personal story, and I was a little leery of putting it out there, but I did. And it was so well received. And so many people said, oh my goodness, thank you for writing about your story and your transformation. That's been an encouragement. And I thought, wow, I think I should write an entire book on this because I had a lot to share. And so that's really where the birthing of this book kind of came from, were those two chapters, and really kind of dipping my foot in the water a little bit, and realizing that the world didn't stop just because I put my personal information out there, that it actually was an encouragement to people.
And it really was, because I like one of the things that I work with my clients the most about is the idea that we're putting our personal stories out there. We're getting raw and vulnerable, and it
Mm-hmm.
can be super scary. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have moments just asking myself, why in the world did I share this piece? Why did I talk about this? Like, I'm currently putting together an outline. I'm for my second memoir,
Yeah.
um, about my own transformation in, I guess, in service of my soul puppy, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But it even like the fear even comes out for me. And I'd love to hear some thoughts from you about just kind of how some of those fears showed up and how you got supported around it and how you kind of got past those fears to even hit publish on this book.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, it was terrifying for me to put this out, and for anybody who hasn't read the book yet, all I'm going to say is chapter one's a doozy, um, and it's raw and rough, and you just have to get through it. As a matter of fact, I say that I say like I know this was a hard way to start a book, but just push through because I promise it gets better. But you know, I suffered from childhood trauma, and that was very difficult to share. I had not shared that publicly in in such a grand way. And you know, when you're writing a book, and I'm sure Ryan, you feel like this, you don't have any control over who's going to read that. Like if I'm in a group of people and I share my story, I know who's in the room. But when you're writing a book and you're putting it out there for the world to see, you have no control over who's going to see that. You can't say, oh, I didn't want that person to read it or that person in my life to read it. It's now out there. And so you have to be ready for that. So there's something terrifying and yet liberating about that all at the same time. So what I had done was back in 2020, when I started this, I basically was going through a divorce. I had gone through my divorce and was trying to heal from all of that. And I'd been journaling a lot, and I'd gone through a lot of different types of healing, whether it be talk therapy, coaching, a number of different things. And I had a journal that I was keeping, and I basically took the journal and started turning it into a book. And I had written the bulk of it 4 years ago, but the book just was published in July. And the reason why it took so long was because I printed it off, put it in a 3-ring binder with the intention of just going through and editing it and bam, getting it out. Well, every time I opened the book up and I read like that first chapter, I couldn't read. I had to close it every time. I wasn't ready. And so I realized I had more healing to do before I could put this out there for the world to read. So it took me 4 years from that beginning time when I had the bulk of the book written to go through my healing journey and then be ready to share that with the world. And even at that point, when I hit the button to send it to the publisher, I was like, oh, am I making a mistake? You know, it's still terrifying. But once I got past it and it was out and I heard how it was reaching so many people, I knew I'd done the right thing. And I just kind of put the rest of that aside. But there is that time where you're like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? What am I doing? For sure.
Yeah. Really could not relate to that more. Could not relate to that more because there's just I feel like there's I feel like the people, you know, it's like you said, we don't have any control over who our story is received by. We're just the vessel to be able to share that story.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And and when you release it from that point, from that high up, it's liberating. It's terrifying. Don't get me wrong, but it's incredibly liberating. It's incredibly freeing just to know that when you close your eyes at night, your story has encouraged somebody to take a look at their own life, to take a look at their own place in the world.
Yeah, and I don't know, Ryan, you've written many, many books, so you'll have to tell me whether you would agree with this, but once I made the decision to publish it, I released it and it was no longer my book, if that makes sense. I released it to the world and I didn't feel the need to try to keep it back, or I have no expectations for the book. It is now out there, and whatever is going to be done with it and however it's going to be used is how it was meant to be used. I have no hold on it anymore. When you're in the writing and the creation stage, that's where I had a hold on it. And that's where I controlled it. But once I released it to publishing, it was no longer, I felt like it was no longer my book in that respect. I had, it was now out there to the world.
I feel that. I totally feel that. And I couldn't agree more, because when you're in that moment, when you're sitting in the coffee shop, or when you're sitting on your bed late at night working, typing away, it could be a very kind of visceral experience. But when you finally can hold a book in your hands that you have written, that is when hey, you don't know who's going to be, you don't know who's going to be ordering it on Amazon, or ordering it or buying it in a bookstore. You release your control over that. And that, even as much experience as I have with this, that's still kind of a common fear that shows up with me, is just who is going to read that. I have to remind myself, you've written the story, you've shared it, now share it with the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things too, during the writing process, part of me, I'm not going to lie, most of it, when the early stages, I was writing it really for me. And so everything I was writing, I wasn't trying to filter or try to picture who's going to read this. But then as I got closer to publishing time, I started rereading it under a different lens of who's going to read this and how. And I had to be careful, and that was the thing too. I had to be careful not to change it for the reader, because what I wrote was for the reader ultimately. And so that was kind of hard. I had to make sure I didn't change things dramatically just because I was afraid of who was going to read it. I had to keep it raw in where it was, but that's sometimes difficult to do. And that feeling of, oh, who's going to read this? Oh, I should change this because this person might be triggered by that, or this might not be, I found myself doing that, almost trying to rewrite the whole book. And I was like, stop, just stop.
I totally hear that. I totally hear that. Well, pardon the pun, let's dive into the book a little bit, because it's a very straightforward book to read. Like, I think I told you earlier in our conversation before we recorded, I think it took me 2 sittings to read through it. It's a short book, but there's a lot of meat on those bones.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because really every chapter could stand alone by itself. It isn't necessarily a book, and I think that's why it kind of leads into one another, but mostly it's just every chapter there's something there for somebody. I feel like everybody who picks it up can find something in that book that they can resonate with, and I think that's what I have heard from people responding to me that they're feeling. And that makes me really happy. And I will say that was kind of the intention, was to not have every chapter so heavy like chapter 1. I wanted there to be other chapters that people could relate to, that maybe they hadn't gone through trauma. They're just living life, and life can be hard sometimes. So that's why I was really happy to hear that it seemed to resonate with, there's something in the book for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, there really is. And kind of on its surface, it's a story about a woman kayaking the Connecticut River with her dogs. But, and I know you can speak to this a lot better than I can, but it's a lot deeper than that. It's about finding yourself after going through hell.
Yeah. So, well, I'll just explain the title of the book, The Bend in the River.
Sure.
That came to me so quickly, because when you're kayaking on the river, now just for your audience, I made the decision to, I have a goal to paddle all 410 miles of the Connecticut River. And it starts in the Connecticut Lakes up near Canada, and it ends in the Long Island Sound. So there's 410 miles. And I only have 175 miles left, so I'm pretty proud of that. So but what I've discovered is being on the water, you could be in great, what we call flat water. It's beautiful, paddling along, no wind, no waves, no disturbances, bright sunny day, gorgeous. You can go around on the same day within an hour. You can turn a bend in the river, and because of the currents, because of the way the mountains are, what have you, the wind can pick up. You can end up in choppy water. You could end up, as I discuss in the book, with a ton of motorboats all around you, where so things can turn on a dime, and you didn't know that until you turned that bend in the river. And that's life. We could be going along smooth, everything's beautiful, and then bam, you turn a bend in your life, and all of a sudden mayhem ensues, and you have to navigate it. We can't get off the ride. You have to stay going through it. And so I wanted people to kind of relate to what I've discovered through being able to navigate these rough waters, navigating that with rough parts of my life, and how it has built up resilience. I've discovered I'm stronger than I ever knew. And just to the point of, I didn't have an option during these tough times on the water. I couldn't get off. I had to keep going. I had to get to where my car was. So I didn't really have a choice. And that's really what life is all about. And then looking back on that rough time when you're off in safety, or you're back in flat water again, and saying, wow, I made it through that. Wow, I'm really proud of myself. I'm stronger than I knew. That's what the bend in the river is all about. And every chapter kind of has that little bit of a story of rough water with, what did I learn from that? What did I gain from that? What was the blessing to take from that? And I think if we navigate through life, even in the darkest, toughest moments, there are blessings to find. You might not be able to see it right away, but over time, when you look back on it, you're going to find the blessing in it. And I think that's pretty cool.
That's an understatement, my friend. That's definitely an understatement, because when you're out on the water, like there's a section, and I'd love for you to talk about this. When you're out on the water and like a sudden storm hits, or you're surrounded by tugboats and barges and a bunch of like jet skis, and you're just like totally getting thrown off your equilibrium, it can, it can be super scary. Like I remember my dad and I used to go fishing a lot, ironically, on the Black Warrior River in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And I remember a like a sudden late summer storm hit. Now we're on, we're on a motorized bass boat. I mean, we're pretty secure, but like I remember I was in the 8th grade, and the sudden storm hit, and we're trying to get back to shelter, and Dad had forgotten to bungee to tie the bungee cord on the cooler. And the lid of that cooler flew off and smacked me in the head. And we both laughed about it for a while, but that scared me for a while. But it also, kind of reminds me of just how, like you said, you can take a bend in the river, and you're in peaceful waters. Take a bend in the river, all hell's breaking loose.
Yeah. When you just described that, all the word that came to me was vulnerable. And when we hit times like that, that's when we discover, no matter how tough we thought we were, at the end of the day, we're all pretty vulnerable as well. And that can be terrifying, to realize how vulnerable you are and how fragile at the end of the day we are. And yet it's in those very times that we discover how really strong we are and how resilient we are. So at the same time that you're feeling vulnerable, when you make it through that and you've navigated that, now you're like, oh my goodness, see, I was vulnerable and yet I was strong enough to make it through. So what it does for me is it says, bring it. I can handle it. Yeah, I'm not going to feel good. I'm going to feel vulnerable again in my life, but I'm going to be able to survive that. And I think that's, the one of the pieces that you're talking about in the book was, the cover of the book was a picture I had taken on my cheap phone, and it was beautiful. And within an hour, I was in total mayhem and chaos. And I thought, I was literally almost in tears. Actually, I probably did cry at one point, because I thought, I'm going to die out here. I'm really going to die out here, because the boats were all over the place. The waves, literal waves. Nobody thinks of waves on the river, but these were waves. They were waking my boat. They were coming over the thing. And not only was it me, but I, as a dog mom, I had my two dogs on board. And I thought, oh my gosh, not only I'm so selfish, I'm here putting myself in harm's way. And now these dogs are in this with me, and they had no choice. They trusted me. So like all this stuff is going through my head, and I just wanted to pull off and cry. And I thought, I don't have that luxury. I got to push through. And so I dug deep, and I got very focused, and I made it through. And it took every ounce of energy and strength and grit, emotional grit, that I had to get through it. But I did. And it taught me, one, not to go out on a Saturday near a marina in the middle of the summer. Okay, so I did learn a lesson. But even if I did find myself in that situation again, I was going to be okay. I was strong enough, and I could do it. And so I was able to laugh about it at one point. Finally, I describe in the book, it's like being on a bicycle on the highway in rush hour traffic. And that's what it really felt like. I'm a little tiny boat, my little inflatable kayak, low on the water, and all these boats are speeding past me. They got sloppier and sloppier as the day went on, because they were drinking and whatnot. And so I was really thinking, oh my goodness. And yet at one point, I just had to laugh about it. Like you were saying, when you got hit in the head. And once you're over
Yeah.
the initial fear, you're like, okay, this is so ridiculous that all I can do is really laugh about it. And that's how you get through.
Yeah, yeah, because you look back on it because you're able to look back on it with a perspective of being able to survive the worst
Yeah.
of your days.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, when I was going through like my divorce, I thought I was so broken and so hurt, and so I talk about that in the book as well, which I won't, get into here. But I mean, that was dark, 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 dark. And yet I look back on it now. I'm not laughing about it. It certainly isn't anything to laugh about. But I do look back on it and I say, wow, yeah, I made it through that. And I'm better for it. It didn't take me down, and I actually am better for it. And I'm able to help others. And so that's like the greatest thing that can happen from when you are enduring very dark times in your life, is when you can look back on it and find the blessing in it, and then use that and help others to navigate what you've just come through. I think that's the most beautiful thing we can ever do in life.
Could not agree more. I'm reminded as you share that, what came up for me is this metaphor that I like to use of like the rubble of a blown up building. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're climbing out from the rubble of that blown up building. Like everything is dark, everything is desolate. But when you get to the top of that rubble and you can start to see that light poke through,
Mm-hmm.
that is that not only is that power, but that's also reminding you, and I know you're a woman of pretty deep faith, but that's also kind of reminding that there's something higher than all of us, and there's something inexplicable for all of us that's just keeping us here, you know?
Amen to that. And that's a beautiful analogy. And then I'll take it one step further. Imagine that when you now can see the daylight, you hear a voice still calling under the rubble, and you take a step back and reach your hand in to help them out, to help them find the light. That's ultimately what it's all about. Like, when you make it out, I believe it is my duty to go back and help those to see the light as well. Yeah.
That gave me chills. That gave me chills because just giving when you've gone through it,
Mm-hmm.
and you can help somebody, if you can help lead somebody
Mm-hmm.
to brighter and brighter light, there's no greater feeling.
Absolutely. Because guess what? We all had that. Somebody helped me. I had people in my life that reached their hand to me and pulled me out. I didn't do it by myself. And yes, I do have a very strong faith, and I know that God was there the whole time. But He also put people in my life to help give me that hand to pull me out. And it's my duty to now go and do the same for others. And I want to.
And I
That's my desire.
yeah,
That's my mission. Yeah.
and I think that that reason right there is why this book is so just resonated so much with
Mm-hmm.
me, because you know when you go through those dark times, there's always going to be people, there's always going to be people holding their hand out, giving you, you know, giving you, unless you're completely isolated from the world,
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be people out there giving you a hand, saying, how can I help, how can I help lead you towards X, Y, and Z.
I do mention that in the book as well. You know, I found myself in a period of time where, through some circumstances and family crisis, that I wasn't able to keep my business growing the way it should have been. And so I ended up in a financial situation during COVID that was difficult. And so I had to be humble enough to say, I can't do this on my own. And yet that was one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given, was when I had to reach my hand out and have others help me and put my pride aside. Um, it was the greatest gift I could have ever received, because now when I'm giving that help to someone else, I fully can appreciate their gratitude because I was there. I felt that gratitude. It's deep. It's much more so than me just saying, yeah, I'm going to go, you know, feed people who are food insecure. Well, I was food insecure. And to have people give me the food with smiles on their faces and with this gracious heart, it touched me. So I was sobbing. And then the next week, when I was serving food to those who needed it, I looked in their eyes and I saw something totally different than I'd ever seen before. And that was, again, the greatest gift I could have ever gotten, because now I understood completely what it meant to these people for me to be giving them the food, because I felt it myself. I think that was very powerful for me. Yeah.
Amen to
It's made
that.
me a better giver.
Amen to that.
And I think they say that in the book, you know, when I had to be the receiver, it made me such a better giver. And that's such a gift. Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful. Just giving me chills over here. Wow. um I have to say, one of my favorite chapters, and I'd love for you to speak a little bit about this, but one of my favorite chapters in the whole book was chapter 4, called The Island of If Only.
Yeah.
And you use that chapter as almost kind of a metaphor of how people can find healing even when they're in various stages of their lives. I really love this chapter, and I love for you to speak a little bit about just how, and you kind of alluded to it in that last statement, but if you could speak a little bit about just how people can relate to that chapter who might not have read your book yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excuse me. This chapter I have found really resonates with everybody that I've ever talked to. So yeah, maybe they haven't gone through childhood trauma, they haven't gone through a divorce, and they haven't done some of the other things. This chapter, I think everybody can relate to. And, especially in this world of social media where, you go online and you look at all these people who, oh, I just bought a new car, or, I have this wonderful family, or I just got this new job, or I took this vacation. And you sit there and you say, oh, if only I had more money, if only my health was better. It goes on and on. If only, if only. And, I think in that respect, I found myself shortchanging myself in my life because I was waiting for I was waiting for it to be better. Like I was waiting to get off this island if only. And I describe it as a desolate island, not one of those lovely tropical islands that we see on in the movies, or the Travel Channel or whatever. This was a desolate island that had nothing, and I felt that I would never get off of it, or I felt I had to just keep waiting for somebody to come rescue me off of this island. And I could hear the beautiful music playing on the other island. I could smell lovely food, the wafting of the food from the other islands, but I couldn't get there. And I discovered, that, yeah, the island I'm on isn't always desolate either. Like it might be rough, but I don't have to wait for somebody to rescue me. I don't have to wait for something to be better. I I can actually turn that island into something for myself. Um, and I can get to that beautiful island with the pretty music and the trees and all that. And I may end up back on that desolate island, back to the analogy of going around the bend in the river. But I know I can get back to the island where it's beautiful. And I think that there's blessings to be found in all of that. And when we're looking at Facebook and things like that, I know myself, when I look back on some of the posts that I made, even during my marriage, and I was like, oh my goodness, who was saying that? That's not how my life really was. I was making it sound all rosy and happy and all of that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that wasn't true. And I had to really start understanding that when I'm reading other people's posts, I can't be jealous of that. I have to look at my own life and find the beauty around me instead of waiting for tomorrow. Because you know what? While I'm waiting for tomorrow, I'm not enjoying today. And that's such a shame because tomorrow is never promised. And so I really need to enjoy each and every day, no matter how rotten it may feel. There's something in that day that I can pull out as a blessing. And I don't need to be waiting for anything. And I don't need to beat myself up over decisions I've made. That's the what if part. What if I hadn't done this? What if I hadn't done that? My life would be so different today. Well, guess what? Those things are all why my life is why it is today. And it's beautiful. And so I don't ever say, well, what if anymore? It's all beautiful at the end of the day. It all weaves together in a beautiful tapestry at the end of the day. I just can't always see it at the moment, but I've learned to be patient and to not say what if and just say, yeah, this is it. This is beautiful. So I feel like that hopefully will help people when they read it. Instead of always saying, well, what if I had done this differently, or if I had done that differently? Well, you didn't. So there's no sense in dwelling on it.
Yeah, yeah. What came up for me as you're sharing that was, I use this analogy a lot, but this idea of being on a, you know, being in a jazz ensemble, like being in a jazz
Mhm.
band. Now, jazz music is so much about improvisation. Now,
Yes.
you may go into a song. There's a basic structure to be sure, but you've got to play off of each other. The drummer's got to play off the bass player's got to play off the piano player, off the guitar player, and you've got to play off of each other, but you've got a basic idea of what the song is going to sound like, but the audience that is watching this show may not know where something is going to go. Honestly, the people on stage might not even know where they're going to go, but it's going to wind up in something incredibly powerful because there's a lot of trust up on that stage. And in what you
Mhm.
just said, there's a lot of trust that you're going to find that beautiful island with the palm trees and with the umbrella drinks.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And enjoy the journey on the way. Don't don't change yourself. Don't say, well, if only this, or, I'll wait until tomorrow for somebody to rescue me out of this situation. Really, I work really hard at trying to find the joy and the blessing out of every single day, even if it was a rough day. I really do. And some days it's a lot harder than others, and sometimes it takes a day or two for me to look back and find that blessing. I can't always find it in the moment, trust me, but I always try to make sure that I don't let it get too far, because I spent my life really wishing something different. I wished I was a different person, wishing that the things that happened to me as a child hadn't happened. Um, and I wasted a whole lot of time in the what if. And I don't want to do that anymore. So
And I think that
I dare say I have fewer days ahead than I do in the past behind me. And so I intend on living every day to its fullest, and no longer waiting for the what if.
I think that's a powerful spot to leave off on. Jackie, one last question.
Mhm.
What is the if somebody were to, when somebody picks up a copy of this book, what do you hope is the greatest, like, one piece of value that a reader could take away from this book?
I guess I want people to feel encouraged and empowered, that no matter what water you're on at the moment, whether it be good or bad, um, that there is hope. And especially if you're really going through it, um, know that don't get discouraged just because you may have tried different things to help heal you, and you're sitting there saying, well, that didn't work, it's hopeless. I have found that I've gone through a lot of different modalities of healing, and each piece was so important. And I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it weren't for all those pieces layering together. So years of talk therapy, just because I didn't heal at the moment doesn't mean it was a waste of time. It all pulled together. And I think I just want people to walk away feeling encouraged, even if you're in a really that dark place or those really choppy waters right now. I just want you to know that there is calm water ahead. And so the one of the last lines in the book is, may you have fair winds and following seas. And that's it's an old, this. It's basically a saying that was said to sailors when they would go out on the water. And that's what I desire for everybody. And I write that when I'm signing books now, I put that in there. May you have fair winds and following seas all the days ahead. And it doesn't mean that you won't have some choppy waters in there, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And that's what I want people to know. It's going to be okay. Yeah.
Amen to that. Jackie, this has been an incredibly powerful conversation. I could go on forever. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you,
How can
Ryan.
people find you, and how can people get a copy of this incredible book?
So honestly, with the book, I created a page for the dogs. So Baxter and Lulu are my faithful puppy companions. And so I've created a Instagram page. I said Facebook, I didn't mean that. Instagram page, and it's CT River Pups. And when you go there, you can start following our journey. There's some pictures from the past. I just did 55 miles in September, was our latest journey. And so there's pictures in there and some descriptions, and you'll get to see the cute dogs, our boat, and get a real flavor for what I talk about in the book. You actually can see what I'm talking about. So I would encourage you to go there. And if anybody wants to message me, just message me through there. CT River Pups.
And I thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and love to do it again.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. As always, it's such a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm grateful for your friendship.
As am I, Jackie. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for watching and listening to the Solar Powered Podcast, a presentation of Royal Hearts Media. For more information about me, just go to royalheartsmedia.com. Follow me on the social media machine at Ryan Hall Writes, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or shoot me a good old-fashioned email at ryan.hall@royalheartsmedia.com. But that'll do it for us. Until we meet again, this is Ryan Hall saying thanks for listening. So long for now, and go get solar powered.